and then I will share my screen. So I'm going to share my screen. Now everybody should be able to see what's on my screen. Right now it's PyCharm. Let me bring up IT140. So this week we are talking about functions. And functions are very powerful and they're very important. Most of the code that I write goes into functions. And what is a function? A function is a block of code. That's what it is, that you're going to reuse again and again and again. And that block of code is data-driven, which means you're going to pass in information. It's going to do something to that information, and then you're most likely going to return information out of the function. So it's a transformative process, usually for the data, and it's got inputs and outputs. So do I have any? Okay. Why do you say functions, not methods? You can use either. zyBooks is calling them functions, so we're going to call them functions. You could also call them methods. They are interchangeable. Basically, what you want is you want a block of statements that are meant to do something. And that block of statements can then be called by its function name. So a function has a few things. A function has a name. It can take parameters. It can return data. And it has to have some form of processing inside the function. So that's what a function is. It has a name. It has to do something. It may take in data, and it may return data. And if you can remember those things about a function, it will make things easier. Now, we have already used functions. We've used print from day one. Okay? We used len. We've used input from day one. We've used int. We've used stir. So we have already used functions. So what's so special about what we're doing right now? We're going to define our own functions starting tonight. And these functions can make your life as a programmer easier. And basically, they allow you to take a series, some form of code and call it by name. And it's very, very handy. So let me do a quick demonstration. And I'm just going to create a new Python file. And I'm going to call it simple func. And so now I have a Python file called simple func. So let me set this up because I always have to do this and it drives me nuts. Python script path. There we go. Okay. And I do not have an interpreter set yet. Okay. So in case anybody hasn't joined before, this is PyCharm. I use PyCharm to write most of my examples in because I can't change zyBooks because all of the instructors share the same instance of zyBooks. But also to give you kind of an overview and an introduction to how PyCharm works, because for your project you're going to have to use PyCharm. So I'm going to write just a simple function, and I'm just, well, hold on. There we go. Okay. There we go. So I'm just going to define a function. Now, there's specific syntax to defining a function. So I'm going to say def, which is a keyword in Python, and it is meant to say I am creating a function. And I'm just going to call it add because I can't think of anything else now. I'm going to take in 2 parameters, and I'll tell you what those are in a minute. I'm going to end that line with a colon. This is very important. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to just print x, y, x plus y. Okay, so what have I just done here? Let me make this a little bit bigger. There we go. I have created a function. I know I've created a function. Why not return the value and print later? I absolutely could do that, Joe. And I will be showing you how to return functions and do something with the return value of the function. But for right now, I'm just trying to introduce the very, very, very basics. And then as we go forward over the next hour or so, I will introduce how to do a return and what to do with that return value. So that's why I'm not doing that right at this moment. Cool. So let me just make a space. What do I have here? I have the keyword def. DEF tells Python I am about to define a function. Now I'm calling this function add. Not very, not very unique, but I'm just calling it add for right now. That's the name right there. ADD is the name of this function. When I use it later, I am going to use the word add. I open with a parenthesis. Whoops, my bad. I have an open parenthesis, and then I have this X and Y, and we'll get to that in a second. I have a closed parenthesis and a colon. If it starts with a def, it has to end with a colon. It has to have a name, and at minimum, an open and closed parenthesis. You don't always have to have this stuff between the parentheses, but at minimum, you have to have the parentheses. And then I have to do something. And in this case, I'm just going to print the product of x plus y. So that's the very minimum and basic what you need on a function. So the interesting thing right now is that my Python is not. Okay, so there's that, there's that. Okay. Why didn't it take? All right, let's see. Okay, nothing happened. No print statement came out when I did that because I just ran simple func. Why didn't it? Why didn't it hit this line of code and print something out? That's because I haven't called this function yet. I haven't done anything that would allow Python to get to this line of code. So how do I call the function? Well, I make sure I'm left justified, and I say add 2 and 3. So what have I done on line 6? Well, on line 6, I have called add, and I have passed it 2 parameters. Now, I'm going to show you some things. I'm going to show you how this works, and then I'm going to break it and show you what happens when it's broken. So you can go back and take a look because there are problems that students who have not done functions before often run into. So I'm going to debug this time. So I just selected right by line 6 here, and I've got a red button which says I'm going to stop there. So I'm going to hit the debug in Python and PyCharm. And the great thing about PyCharm, for those who haven't played with it yet, is that you can walk through your code line by line by line, and it will tell you what's happening. So I'm on line 6, and I know that because I have this blue line here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to step in to this function. So in previous classes, I've used this step over button, but right now I want to use this step into button. So I'm going to step into it, and now I'm on line 3. I'm on line 3 because on line 6 I said use the add function and I'm giving you this 2 and 3 value, and I want you to do something with it. Now, another nice thing about PyCharm is that when you are in a function, it will show you what information you passed in. In this case, I passed in 2 and 3, and if I step over that, and then I'm done, and the console said the product of 2 plus 3 is 5. So now let's go to the next step, these things in the parentheses, okay? If I go back up here to add, I have this thing called X and this thing called Y. These are called parameters or arguments, and they basically allow me to pass in data to my function because I want something done in this function, and I want something done to my data. So I'm going to pass in data, and in this case I passed in 2 and 3, and the function's going to do whatever it's going to do with that data, and then it's going to return. Now, right now we're not returning any information, but a function always returns, whether or not you explicitly tell it to or don't explicitly tell it to. Now, the nice thing about this is that I can call add with all kinds of things. I can say 1 and 1. I can say 99, 101. And if I run this program right now, what you will see is product is 2 and 3 is 5, 1 and 1 is 2, 99 and 101 is 200. And I didn't change this at all. What I did was I called my function 3 different times with 3 different pieces of data, and the same information that it was acted on in the same way. So in this case, it's a very simple print statement, but when we get into doing more functions, we will find out that you can do some very complex things. You can do some very simple things, but the point is that a function allows me to reuse code. Last week when we talked about loops, I said that we were starting into the process of reusability. So that means I can reuse my code again and again and again. Well, functions are the next step in reusability. So you can do the same thing again and again and again as many times as you need to. So the other thing you can do with a function is return a value. So I'm going to define another function, and I'm going to say def simple ret. And I'm going to just take in X and Y again. And this time, I'm going to return X plus Y. And this isn't any huge function, but we have a new thing called a return type. Let me get rid of that little squiggly. So return, actually let me do it like this. Product equals X plus Y. So it's easier for me to show you in the debugger. And then return product. Whoops, not return. Okay, so what I have just done is defined another function. Simple ret is just another function. Its name is simple ret. I'm passing in my X and Y again. Now, parameters are positional, okay? As you'll notice down here, and I didn't mention this earlier and I should have, I have two parameters. The number 2 will be X, and the number 3 will be Y. How do I know that? Because they're positional. This is the first argument. This is the first parameter that it's expecting. This is the second argument. This is the parameter that it's expecting. It is always positional. That's how you know. 2 will be X, 3 will be Y. 99 will be X, 101 will be Y, because this is in the first position and this is in the second position. So now let me go back to simple ret. Simple ret takes two arguments, X and Y. The syntax is correct, so I'm defining simple ret XY colon. Always got to remember that colon. Now what am I doing? Well, I'm just adding X and Y together again, and I'm setting it equal to, I'm setting the value of the variable product equal to X plus Y. So product, it's just a variable. That's all product is. I know it's a variable because it's on the left-hand side of a single equal sign. The difference about product is that it doesn't exist anywhere other than inside simple ret. It does not exist in the bigger program because I have defined it inside of a function. And then I'm going to return product. So return says, take this piece of data that is in, I have a value. It's in this variable product that doesn't exist anywhere but in the function simple ret. But I want to return this piece of information so that somebody else can use it. So the return statement allows me to take the value in the variable product and send it out to somebody else. So right now I'm just going to, just to make this easier, I'm just going to comment out add because we already used that. And I'm going to call simple ret. I'm going to say var1 is simple ret 1, and then I'm going to print var1. So let's see what happens here from line 15. So I'm going to debug this again just so we can see what happens. So I'm sitting here on line 15 and nothing has happened yet. I'm going to step in to my function simple ret. Now I'm at line 7. I see that X is 1 and Y is 1. I am going to, now if you look down here at variables right now, there's no variable called product, and that's because it hasn't been created yet. When I execute what's on line 7, the variable product is created and the value is set. So we know that the value is 2, and I'm going to now return the value in product. So I'm going to step over. So now what do I have? Well, I don't have anything yet because I haven't finished executing line 15. So I'm going to step over this. I will see that var1 is 2, and then I'm going to print var1. So that's how I return a piece of information from a function. So we have two things now. We can send data into a function, and we can get data out of a function. And that's very important because there is so much you can do with that. Now, I want to show you a couple of errors. First, there's just simple compilation errors. If I have a comma, I'm going to start getting some red lines in my pie chart because it can't resolve it. Python treats X and Y as if they were variables because they are. Those variables are only going to exist in the defined function. So this x and y is completely different than this x and y. They're not the same. In fact, I could just say A and B here. As long as I say A and B here, I'm good. So this A, no, not I, A and B, they're just variables. They're variable names. They hold values just like any other variable, except they only exist within the scope of a function. We haven't really dealt a lot with scope because almost everything we do is in the global scope, or it's in like a loop or an if scope. Functions have their own scope, which means variables exist only inside that function. And lines 7 and 8 are inside the function. A and B are variables that are accessible inside the function. So let me start by doing this, okay? And if I attempt to run this, I'm going to get indentation error, unexpected, and expected an indentation block. That is because when product equals A plus B is left justified, it is not inside the function. It is outside the function. So anything inside the function has to be tabbed in at least 1. Okay? It can be tabbed in more if you're using an if statement or if you're doing a loop inside of a function. But at minimum, it has to be tabbed in 1. And when I run this again, I get 2. So I'm good with that. The other thing that you can do is, what else? We have the ubiquitous colon. I think I'm going to leave that there for right now. And we're going to go back into zyBooks and take a look at some stuff, and then we'll walk through some of the challenges. And as always, stop me if you have any questions. So calling a function, we just learned how to call a function, how to define a function, and how to call it. So that's just learning how to define a function, basic function call, that's all good. Parameters, which is what we were just talking about. And so what we are doing is we are passing a piece of information in, and we're using a parameter to do that. Now in zyBooks, they say parameter is an input function specific in a function definition. An argument is the value provided in the parameter. I use parameter and argument interchangeably. zyBooks doesn't. zyBooks says that argument is the value, just to let you know. So let's see. We talked about those. And by the way, if there's any challenges or labs you guys want to see, let me know, and I'll make sure that we cover them. Okay, so this one is a basic function call. Complete the function definition to output the hours given minutes. Sample output 210. So, okay, so 210 minutes is 3.5 hours. Okay. So what they want you to do here is just divide by 60. Let's see. So let's do this because it asks us to actually define the function. And I want to go over how to read these when they talk about defining a function. So first I'm going to create 5, 2, 3 Python file. Okay. So what are they asking us to do here? They're saying define a function, print total inches with parameters number of feet and number of inches that prints the total number of inches. note there are 12 inches in a foot, with parameters num feet and num inches, okay? Sample output with inputs 58, 5 and 8. Okay, now I get it. So what are we going to do? Let's just copy what they have. Now the other thing that I didn't mention before, but that I'm going to, is that your function has to be defined before it's called. If I did def print total inches right here, and that's not the right solution for that. You'll notice that this still has a red line, and if I try and run it, let's edit the configuration and change this file. Okay. If I try and run this, I'm going to get an error. What happened? I hit the debug button. Ah, there we go. Oh, it was waiting for input. My bad. If I try and run this, let's say I'm going to put in 1 for feet and 2 for inches, and then I get name print total inches is not defined, and I'm getting that at line 8. Well, but I just defined it here. That's because it has to be defined in Python before it's called. So at line 8, Python doesn't know that print total inches exists. It won't know that print total inches exists until line 10. So how do I remedy this? I move it up here. And all of a sudden, I get print total inches. Perfect. So I'm going, and I know that because I can run it. Let's do that. And 2. Okay. And it printed something because I'm not doing anything yet. So let's take this step by step. And it may seem a little slow, but I want to show you when you're writing functions and when you're working on your own coding, because we're getting very close to the time where you guys are going to have to start working on your project. It's sometimes good to go slowly. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to print the parameters, because I just want to make sure I get them. So I'm going to do 1 and 2, and it prints back 1 and 2. Perfect. I know what I'm doing. So now what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to basically print the total number of inches given feet and inches. So this is pretty simple. So I'm not going to do these 2 prints anymore. But I am going to say total is feet times 12 plus inches. So, and now, before I return anything, I'm just going to print total. And I'm going to run it. And I'm going to say 1 and 2, and it's 14 inches. So, but it didn't say, well, did it say that it wanted me to print it? Let's see. It says that prints the total number of inches. So its total inches is 68. So the function, define a function, print total inches with parameters num feet and num inches that prints. So the print statement needs to be inside the function. I just needed to get that right. So in this case, we're just going to say total inches. We'll do it really old school. And 2 and 3. Look, what did I do? Oh, my bad. It will just not be old school. Now let's run it. 2 and 3, 27 inches. So that is what this challenge was asking. It was asking me to define a function. There were 2 parameters that were going to be passed in, 2 values. I was going to then do a calculation with those values and print the total output. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about return statements. And Python is unique in languages because most languages you can return one thing, or you have to create a structure before you can return multiple items. You don't have to do that in Python. You can just give it, return this, 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 and this, and it will just return it, which is great. So we did talk about the return statement itself, and let's see, temperature conversion. Okay. All right, function call in expression. Max num with greater num a and b plus the greater of num x, num y, and num z. Use just one statement. Hint call find max twice in an expression. Okay, they could make that a little bit more. Okay. They could make that a little bit clearer than mud. All right, so there's find max. So they want us to, what? Assign max sum with the greater of a and b plus the greater of x and y. Okay. So I'm just going to copy this, and we'll just create 532. Oh, come on. Okay. So basically, what they want is they want us to use this find max function, and they want us to add the max of a and b to the max of y and z. So how do I do that? Well, I can use my find max function. And find max returns the maximum value. So if I look at this and I read it, because I didn't write this function, zyBooks is giving it to us. There's a function called find max. It takes 2 arguments, num1 and num2. Find max does something, and what it's supposed to do is find the maximum of the 2 numbers. And in the end, it's going to return whatever the maximum of those 2 were. And then it's my job to call this function and then add the maximum of a and b to the maximum of y and z. So what I have to do here is I'm going to say val 1, yes. What is it? Yes. Joe, we could just do that. We could just do the max, and, well, we'd have to do max twice. We'd have to do max for A and B and max for Y and Z. And that is completely valid, and max is a built-in method for Python. You're completely correct. But that's not what zyBooks is asking you to do. Okay, zyBooks is asking you to use their function. And that's just what zyBooks is asking. I can't explain why they're asking it. You could use max if you wanted to. But for what we're doing for this challenge, I'm following what zyBooks does. So if you can use max and zyBooks is happy with it, go right ahead. In the labs, be careful, because our, yes, that's what zyBooks says to do. Be careful on the labs. And the challenges, it doesn't matter, because we as teachers don't actually get to see your challenge code. We're just given the result of whether or not it passed. The labs are different, okay? And I can only talk about me, but if you go out and decide you want to use a standard Python function, go for it. I don't have a problem. I reward my students if they go beyond and they say, well, there's a better way to do this, or Python already gives me this stuff. I'm good with that. Not all instructors might be good with that. So when you're doing the labs, read them carefully, and if you think that you know a better way to do it, reach out to your professor before you put it in that lab. Some professors want you to do it exactly as zyBooks wants you to do the labs. So just a precaution there. So I am going to say retval is going to be find max of num A and num B. And then I'm going to say retval 2 is find max of num y, y and num z. And then I'm just going to, for right now, I'm not going to worry about any other the other stuff. I'm just going to print retval 1 plus retval 2. So I'm not going to add the verbiage. So what I'm doing here, and what zyBooks I think is trying to say, is that I am going to call the same function twice with different information, and I'm going to get that information back, and then I'm going to do something with it. So if I run this, let me change this. Okay. 3, 2. If I run this now, and I put in 1, 2, 5, 4, okay, I should get 7, and I get 7. Now, how did I know that? Well, because 1 and 2, so 2 is the greater number, and so if find max is doing the right thing, it's going to return 2. And actually, just so we can see that, I'm going to run this in the debugger, just so we can get an idea of what just happened. So on the console, I'm going to put in 1, 2, and 5, and 4 again. So here I am. I am on line 18, and I'm going to step into my function, and I see up here that num1 is 1.0 and num2 is 2.0. And I'm going to step over all this stuff. It's doing its thing. And now max val is 2.0, and I'm going to return that. So when I step over this, and then I step over it one more time because it needs to finish executing line 18, I get retval1 is 2.0. So if I step in again, and I step over this guy, I step over here, retval2 is 5, because that's what was returned to me, and then I print it. So does anybody have any questions so far? So I think there's probably time. Dynamic typing. We should talk about dynamic typing. So basically, dynamic typing, there are two languages can do one of two things. They can statically type or they can dynamically type. Statically type means that I have to tell the program what the type is. So if it's an integer, I would have to say int. like you have to do in Java. Okay, in Java and a lot of other languages, you have to tell it the type of value that you're going to put into a variable. Python is not a strongly typed language. Python allows you to pretty much throw in whatever you want to throw in, and then hopefully it will work out. So in the example they're using here, they have add x and y, and then it returns x plus y. And so that's great. It's perfect. We know, 5 plus 7 is 12, but what happens if somebody puts in a string? Well, in a strongly typed language, you would get a compilation error. Java would throw up its hand and say, you cannot pass in a string for an integer. Python doesn't do that. So you need to be careful when you're writing your functions and sometimes figure out what the type is. Okay. Null pointer exception. Yes, null pointer exception. So that's just something to be cognizant of when you're writing functions and when you're doing those functions, because Python won't do anything to stop you from doing something you shouldn't do when you're sending in variables into a function, when you're sending data via parameters. Okay, the reasons for defining functions. They say improving program readability. Basically, you want to, it's reusability. As I said last week, when you can find a way to reuse the same set of code, the same block of code, again and again and again, you have reduced the total amount of code that you have to write, reduce future maintenance, increase the quality, and reduce the possibility of error. Every time you write a line of code, you introduce the possibility of error. You introduce risk from a quality perspective. And so if you can avoid introducing risk, you would obviously do that. And functions do that because they allow you, from a named perspective, to just call the same block of code as many times as you need to. So why functions? That's why functions. It's just, and it is a construct that is used constantly in programming. From my first days of programming C and C++, actually C, because C++ wasn't quite around yet, back in the Stone Ages, to programming Python now, I have always used functions. And they are your friend, and you will need them for the project. I'm not going to worry about function stubs. Function stubs are really great if you're doing incremental development or if you're doing some form of testing. You can choose to use stubs or not. I don't use stubs. I just kind of do baby steps. Functions with branches and looping. You can put anything in a function. You can put branches and looping in a function, and it will work just like branches and looping should work. You can make functions as complex or as simple as you want, as you need, as the problem requires. So yeah, you can do branching and looping in a function. You can call a function from a branch or a loop. Be careful if you're looping and you're in a function and you call the function that you're in. You can do that and bad things will happen. I was hoping you would please go over 571. Okay, Allison, I can go over 571. We'll do that right now. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, So let's go and read about 571, okay? Define function print popcorn time with parameter bag ounces. If bag ounces is less than 3, print too small. If it's greater than 10, print too large. Otherwise, compute and print 6 time bag ounces followed by seconds. End with a new line. So that seems relatively okay. So let's do this. I'm just going to copy what they're giving us here. I meant the one with either 5 integers. It's a little further down. Okay. So the one with 5 integers. Do you know which one that is, Allison? Okay. If you just want to let me know which one it is. It's above popcorn. Okay. Okay. So, okay. Numbers program with multiple functions. User-defined functions make a program easier to understand. That's true. Get numbers to read a number of integers from a user. 3 unfinished functions are defined, which should print only certain types of numbers that were entered. Complete the unfinished functions, adding loops and branches where necessary. Match the output with the sample below. Okay, so let's do this, because I'm fond of copying and pasting. So this isn't really going to be 571, but I'm not going to rename it. So let's see. What are they asking? All right, 5 integers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Numbers, odd numbers, negative numbers. Okay, so what do we have here? Yeah, this isn't real clear. All right, so get numbers. So I'm going to input. This is where I'm going to do my user input, and I'm going to enter 5 integers. And then I've got print all numbers, which is going to print the numbers, print odd numbers. So, okay, here is, I have to print all the numbers, I have to print only odd numbers, and I have to print only negative numbers. So I have to finish these 3 functions. Well, print all numbers, I'm getting numbers in, and I'm assuming numbers is a list. So, and how do they want that output to look? They just want it to be spaces. Okay. So what we're going to do, I'm assuming it's a list. It's going to say numbers. That's not quite right, but it'll be close and you guys can fix it. Sorry. Whoops, my bad. Print num. So that's pretty close to what you want. This whole print numbers up here isn't quite right, but that's what you want. The other thing is, oh, here's probably a better way to do it. Sorry about that. No. Now I'll let you guys worry about that. It's almost 10. So basically here, what you want to do is you want to have a for loop. And in that for loop, you're going to go through numbers, and you're going to, in this case, I am printing Okay. So in this case, I've got numbers, and I'm going to roll through the list of numbers that's given to me, and I'm just going to print them with a space at the end. So odd numbers is, how do we find an odd number? So there's a couple different ways to do that in Python. And one thing I'm going to do is okay, this is perfectly acceptable, okay? So there are different ways to check odd or even numbers, and here is one of them. You use the modulo operator, and if it is 0, then you know it's an even number. If it's not, then it's an odd number. So here, again, I'm going to say, I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to go through, it's going to be very similar here, but I'm going to have an if statement. So I'm going to go through numbers, and I'm going to say if num modulo 2 2 is not equal to 0, then I'm going to print num end. Oh, sorry, odd numbers. Now negative numbers. So this is very similar. And I'm going to say end here so it doesn't do a new line. And then in this case, I'm going to say if num is less than 0, then I'm going to print it. And so that's what you would do for that particular activity. You don't have to change get numbers. Okay, get numbers just basically allows you to put in a token, some number of times, and it says numbers is a list, input, enter some amount of numbers, and in this case it's going to be 5 numbers. And then you're going to print all numbers, print odd numbers, and print even numbers. So does that pretty much answer your question? I'm going to assume yes. So let's see. Functions or objects, everything is really an object in Python. It exists by name, basically. Common errors, we did a couple of them. Yeah, it's getting, sorry. Scope, we talked a little bit about scope. There's inside the function scope and outside the function scope. Anything that's defined inside the function is in the scope of the function. Namespaces and scope resolution, I'm not going to worry about that right now. Function arguments, we've talked about that. Keyword and default parameter values. Okay, so you can have a default parameter value which will allow you to not have to pass in an argument. So I can basically say that when I'm defining my function that I want it to take, if somebody doesn't pass in an argument, then I want it to take something specific, or I want it to have a 0 or none or a specific string so that people don't have to necessarily know the defaults. I as the definer of the function can do that. So for instance, here you'll say print date, day, month, year, and style. The style has a 0 equals 0 after it, and that is the default. So 0 is the default for style. If I don't pass in a style, it will take default. It will take 0. So what's the difference in calling it? So I have print date here, which takes 4 arguments. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. I have print date here, which takes 4 arguments. 1, 2, 3, 4, good. But then I have print date here. It only takes 3 arguments. So shouldn't that be some kind of an error? Well, no. And the reason it's no is because this style here has a default. So it will say this is the first argument, this is the second argument, this is the third argument. I don't have to give it a 4th argument if I don't want, because there's a default. So that's what default values do for you. I do use default values sometimes in my work, not always, but that's often because we're so dynamically data-driven that I'd rather check and have an explicit error than have a default. But so just know that you can have default values. Arbitrary argument lists, you can have what they call variable argument lists. So you don't necessarily have to have a set number. You can pass in a variable number of arguments. Now, we're not going to have to really worry about that in this class. Just know that you can do that. Multiple function outputs. This is very handy. This is something I use quite often. And basically what it is you can return more than one value from a Python function. Very few languages allow you to do this. So what you'll see here is under get grade status, you've got mean and standard deviation, std_dev. So I'm returning 2 different values from my get grade status. And the way I do that is here on the return statement, I just comma separate and any and all values I want to return. And here I have to have the same number of values. So in this case I have mean and standard deviation, so 2, or std_dev. And here I have average and standard deviation on the left-hand side. So what Python will do is it will take the value for mean and put it into average, and it will take the value for std_dev and put it into standard deviation. So it's very, very handy. Docstrings. Basically, docstrings just allow you to comment. There are multiple line comments, and I use them quite often when I am writing my functions, because 6 months from now I need to come back and read it and figure out what it was supposed to do. It's good to have those comments there. Let's see, engineering examples. Swapping values. So, yeah, this is just defining a swap. And so we'll go through this unless somebody else wants another lab done. Then we'll just go through this and then call it a night. So this is, what lab is this? This is lab 5.18. Okay, let's change this. So this is just a standard swap function, and all the swap function does is it basically swaps out 2 numbers. So if I am, let's go here and just copy the stuff. So what is it saying? It's saying write a program whose input is 2 integers and whose output is 2 integers swapped. So you're going to input 3 and 8, and the output is going to be 8 and 3, and you're going to define a function called swap. Now, swap function is pretty standard. So I'm defining this. I have 2 values, user 1 and user 2, and I'm going to need a temp. So I'm going to say temp is going to equal user val 1. User val 1 is going to equal user val 2. And user val 2 is going to equal temp. And I've just swapped my numbers, and that's all a swap does. And then I'm going to, what does it want to output? Okay. So program must define the following function, swap values, return the two values in swapped order. So I'm going to then say v1, comma space v2 equals swap values. And I'm going to, just because in your program you're going to have to use an input, I'm just going to say 2 and 3 here, just to go a little quicker. And here I'm going to return user val 1 and user val 2. And then I'm going to print so let's see what happens when I run this. Okay? So that wasn't right. V1, V2, user val 1, user val, oh, that's my bad. That's what happens when you don't read over your code. Okay? So I passed in 2 and 3, and it came back out with 3 and 2. So that's what the swap function is, and basically all I did was write a function that did the swap, and this is, you could look this up on Google at any point in time and say, how do I swap variables in a function? The nice thing about Python is you can return both values. So I passed in user val 1 and user val 2. I returned user val 1 and user val 2, but user val 1 has a different value and user val 2 has a different value. I then, yes. Okay. Can you do 19.2? For the lab, everything after the if statement needs to be inside the if statement. It will work with zyBooks, but zyBooks will not like it. Okay, I'm sorry, William. I think I missed what your comment was about, William. And yes, we can take a quick look at 19. So William, if you want to put either just talk or put in the comments what you were talking about, I'm drawing a blank. Okay. Okay. So we're going to do 5.19. So exact change. Write a program with total change amount as an integer input that outputs the change using the fewest coins. Yes, this is a fun one. One coin per line. The coin types are dollars, quarters, nickels, dimes, and pennies. Use singular and plural coin names. Okay, so we actually did this. Did we do this? No, we didn't do something like this. So I am going to, and this is when we're going to use the floor, I think. So if the input is 0 or less, the output is no change. If the input is 45, it's 1 quarter and 2 dimes. So this, I'm going to show you some of it. I'm not going to do the whole thing. So we're going to def exact change, and then I'm going to call okay, and then I'm going to call exact change. Oops. So what am I going to do here? Well, they've got user total. So what I have to do here is I have to use the floor function, I believe. So let me look up. Oh, what? Okie dokie. Come on. Okay. For 518, what you wrote will return the correct output, but if you put it into zyBooks, it will only give you 2 out of 10 points. It requires the output inside the predefined if statement to work. Thank you for letting me know that. I don't actually ever put anything into zyBooks, so I don't know the tricks like that. So thank you for letting us know. So, oh, I see. It needs to be inside the main. There we go. Is that what you meant? I think that's what you meant. It has to be inside the main. Okay. Cool. Thank you for catching that. So, I need to find out what the change is. So, first of all, if user total is less than 0, then I'm going to print out, what am I going to print? I'm going to print out no change and return. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to have an if statement. If user total is less than or equal to 0, I'm going to print no change, and I'm going to return without anything there because I don't want anything else to happen in this function. If I don't have anything, if there's no change, I'm going to print out no change, and then I don't want to do anything else. So I'm going to exit this function. That's what a return statement will do if you're not giving it any other arguments or any other values. So now I can go about calculating the change. So I'm going to have quarters, nickels, dimes, and pennies. So the first thing I want to do is figure out quarters. So I'm going to say quarters equal user total. Yeah, I got to look up floor again. I always forget what it is. Okay, so floor operator. So floor division, that's what we're doing here. And so what we want is a whole number. So that's what floor division does. So in this case, I'm going to say user total divided by 25 because I want to know how many times 25 goes into user total with no remainder, or sorry, as a whole number. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to do user total divided by 25. And then for right now, I'm just going to print, you need to make this pretty, quarters are, so this isn't the exact right output. Oh, my bad. That's not right. I apologize. Quarters. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to now say user total equals user total minus quarters times 25. So what I need to do is I need to create a new total to work from, okay? So I know how many quarters there are. So if, if there's 1 quarter, I want to remove 25 cents from the total and then go back and take a look at the next thing. So then I'm going to say nickels is going to be the new user total of 10. And again, you've got to put in some if statements and some print statements that are correct. And so I'm going to say nickels are nickels. And then we'll do one more. And then actually I'm just going to do the user total again. User total is user total minus 10 times, nickels, if I can spell, times 10. So let me just run this and we will see what happens. Now, like I said, this is not the total answer. This is part of the answer, and you will have to format this appropriately. And so if it's a single quarter, then you're going to want to put quarter, not quarters. So there's going to have to be some if statements around it. So let me edit the configuration real quick. And I'm just going to run this. And just to see, we're going to put in our 45. And I did something wrong. Okay. Where did I do that? Print. Quarters are format quarters. Print. ORMAT would help. It helps if I spell things correctly. Okay, so let's just put in 45. And so there are 1 quarter and 2 nickels. So that is correct. Now, like I said, this isn't the full answer. You guys need to, do it if it's a single quarter or if it's multiple quarters. And you also need to put things in here for dimes and pennies because 45 is not the only value that zyBooks is going to use to test this. So this is the beginning of Lab 5.19. Does that answer your question? So unless there are other questions, I'm going to call it a night. And this stuff should be up tomorrow. I'm going to stop the recording.